Welcome to another edition of George Washington Speaks. I'm your host, Tom Saffold. In this edition of George Washington Speaks, we will follow Washington not into an unknown wilderness, but into an unknown level of British society, and not peopled by Indians, but by colonial officials, judges, merchants, military officers, planters, and the leading gentlemen of society. George found his way through the wilderness, but could he do the same thing in this high social stratum? And how will his experience impact the rest of his life?
I was 9 when my brother Lawrence was infected with tuberculosis. He was only 22 and was fighting the Spanish with the British regular army in the Gulf of Mexico when he caught the dreaded disease. It was not active for 9 years, but then it became a persistent cough that gradually had gotten worse. At age 31, he traveled to England to seek the very best medical advice he could find. His doctor advised him that spending the winter in a warmer climate should be beneficial to his health, and that there was a good chance that he would recover. The British colony of Barbados in the southern West Indies was the recommended tropical location. Lawrence's wife, Anne, did not accompany him, so he invited me to go along with him. I quickly finished my last survey, and we sailed for Barbados when I was 19. It was another adventure, since this was the first and only time I traveled outside of the American colonies. The trip offered me an opportunity to get a glimpse of a much wider world than Virginia. On the southbound journey, I was amazed by the different types of fish that I had never seen before. There were dolphins, pilotfish, sharks, and barracudas, which some of the sailors called tigerfish. I also occupied my time by watching the sailors continually work the sails and ropes and observing the steering of the ship. I asked endless questions about what they were doing and why they were doing those things. It all made sense to me, and I felt that sailing would be a skill that would come easy to me, since I was a surveyor. After 6 long weeks in November, we arrived in Bridgetown, which is on the southwest tip of the island and had a large harbor. I was full of excitement and anticipation, and after 6 weeks, I was ready to get off that ship. Barbados is actually a small island whose climate is ideal for the growing of sugar cane. Sugar cane was cheap to raise and was in such high demand that it sold for very high prices, and this made the island's leading planters very rich. That is, very, very rich. Bridgetown was one of the most heavily populated cities in the British American colonies, and it was the largest city that I had ever seen. It made the capital of Virginia, Williamsburg, look like a mere village. Lawrence's wife's uncle, Gedney Clark, was a very influential member of Bridgetown society, and upon arrival he invited us to join him for dinner. During the following days, we explored the exotic and completely unfamiliar landscape with Mr. Clark, and we found a spacious house to rent a mile from Bridgetown that was owned by a Captain Crofton. It was very pleasantly situated, and the prospect, that is, view, was extensive by land and pleasant by sea, as we commanded the view of Carlisle Bay and all the shipping in such a manner that none could go by without us seeing it. The island was so densely populated that everywhere I looked it was furnished with inhabitants. I was perfectly ravished by the beauty of Barbados and was overwhelmed by the beautiful views which on every side presented the fields of cane, corn, fruit trees, and in a delightful green. In the evenings, we dined frequently at the Clarks' Bridgetown home and met colonial officials, judges, merchants, military officers, planters, and the leading gentlemen of the island. I noted in my diary that the dinner exposed me to the greatest collections of fruits I had yet seen on the table. There was the Grand Idella, which was a series of large baskets that was filled with ackee, bananas, carambola, cherries, dunks, mangoes, grapefruit, guavas, sea grapes, soursop, sweet oranges, watermelons, and tamarind. After dinner, many of the guests at the Clarks' home invited us over to their homes for dinner as well. We were genteelly received and agreeably entertained wherever we went. Their hospitality and genteel behavior toward a young person such as I was heady stuff for a 19-year-old who was of no particular distinction. It was during these dinners that I had my first opportunity to hear discussions concerning the affairs of Britain's far-flung empire with men from another colony whose interests and concerns were very different from my own. I must admit that I enjoyed being treated like a gentleman of some means, rather than Lawrence's tag-along younger brother. As I look back, I realize that time contributed to my desire to be a gentleman of some means within the higher social class of the Virginia gentry. It was a short distance from Crofton's house to Needham's Point, a significant outcrop of land where Charles Fort guarded the entrance to Carlisle Bay. I was impressed by the fort, which was pretty strongly fortified and mounted about 36 guns within the fortification itself, and beyond the walls there were 2 lower batteries facing both northwest and southeast. I dined often with the commander of the fort, and he talked extensively about the fort, the fortifications all around the island, and about military matters concerning Britain's far-flung possessions. After 2 weeks, I found that I was exposed not only to the fruity dinner delicacies, but was also strongly attacked with the smallpox. It turned out to be a severe strain of the disease, and it caused me to have a high fever, severe headaches, vomiting, pains in the loins and back, and the small eruptions that gave the disease its name. Fortunately, after a month of confinement, I recovered, primarily due to my strong physical condition. However, many others who were similarly exposed as I died. The illness left scars on my face, but I was thankful to have survived. The illness did turn out to be an advantage to me. During the American Revolution, both the British and American armies were greatly infected by smallpox, but due to my previous infection, I was immune to it.
As a result of his time with the social elite in Barbados, Washington decided that he would make every effort to enter into that society. A month of recuperation from smallpox did not cool his desire. Join us next time for A Joyless Christmas and Brotherly Advice, when Washington travels back to the colonies without his brother, who is not recuperating as planned. It's always instructive to hear what wisdom is passed down from one generation to another from a person's deathbed. We listen in as Lawrence advises George.